We've outlined 3 areas of support or 3 areas of action that we want to see. I found that Mr. Trudeau, like Justin Trudeau, has often said the right things around the environment, but his track record is the worst of all G7 nations. The only G7 nation that has increased emissions instead of reducing them since he's taken office.
Hi, I'm Megan Gibson, Senior Editor International here at the New Statesman. Today I'm interviewing Jagmeet Singh. He's the leader of Canada's New Democratic Party. He's the first person of colour to lead a major party in Canada, and the NDP has also been hugely influential in pushing Justin Trudeau's government to the left. He's joining us today to talk about climate action ahead of COP26, Indigenous rights, and how to unite a party. Hi Jagmeet, thanks for joining us today.
Hey there, my pleasure to be here.
I guess first I'm going to start with, following September's general election, how would you describe the national mood in Canada at the moment?
I think people were very frustrated with the election. And what I found interesting was that people maintained that frustration throughout the whole election. I thought there was no point. It was only 2 years into this minority government. We are still well in the middle of the pandemic. And at that particular moment, there were some of the worst cases happening with COVID-19 from just throughout the whole pandemic. They were happening at that moment. In the 18 months, the worst cases were happening in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So at that point, people were pretty frustrated with the election. They thought there was no point in it. And then the outcome, the electorate, people in Canada, re-elected essentially the exact same parliament that went into the election. So people kind of felt like, what was the point of all that? So there's a bit of frustration with the Liberal government saying, why did you call this election? It seems like the only reason was to get a majority and you didn't. And so on top of that, there's been a really big delay in having Parliament recalled. So then folks are kind of wondering, what was the urgency to call an election if you're not going back to Parliament for months? So a lot of confusion and frustration around that. And I think the overall mood is people want help to get through the pandemic and then want to see some changes to making life better for folks. And I feel like there's a really big openness to seeing some of the changes that we've been pushing for a long time. People want to see more investments in healthcare. They want to see changes to the way we take care of one another. And I'm encouraged by that. That's something that gives me a lot of hope.
Well, your party, the NDP, remains pretty hugely influential in determining which policies Justin Trudeau's minority government is going to be able to pass. What are your priorities going to be in the coming months?
Yeah, a number of priorities. I would say that in the short term, we've got COP coming up, so we're really focused on how we can reduce emissions, do our part to fight the climate crisis. That's really a top of mind concern and something that came up a lot in the pandemic, or came up a lot in the election, because we had some of the worst forest fires on record in Canada, throughout Canada, not just in BC, where it's normally the main focus of forest fires. There were a number of really big forest fires in Ontario as well. So it was something that impacted the country. There was heat waves that we'd never seen before, record heat waves. So a lot of concern around the climate that people are really worried about. So that's one big concern. Justice for Indigenous people is something that is really on the minds of people, and for me, really important personally. We see a consciousness shift in Canada, particularly after the discovery of unmarked graves, and the number keeps on increasing. But the unmarked graves from residential schools, where Indigenous children were stripped of their home, of their language, of their sense of self, and in many cases they were stripped of their lives. These schools were run by the government and by churches, and the mark that they've left, the legacy that they've left that's ongoing in terms of the genocide and injustice against Indigenous peoples, has really pushed people and motivated people to say, well, what can we do now to walk the path of justice and fairness? Like, there's got to be something we can do now. So that desire is really strong. And again, it's something that's really inspiring, that people care so much. And for me, that's a top priority. So one of the concrete things we want to see is that this current government is fighting Indigenous kids in court. They're appealing a Human Rights Tribunal decision, one of the most important tribunals, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, which found that the Canadian government had discriminated willfully and recklessly against Indigenous kids. They weren't getting adequate funding. And instead of following the ruling of this tribunal, they've appealed it and continue to lose the case in court, but continue to appeal it. And so now we're saying, stop fighting them in court, follow and comply with the ruling, and start actually investing fairly and equitably in Indigenous kids instead of fighting them in court. So that's another really big concern. And that there's a number of other concerns around clean drinking water and housing for Indigenous people. And then I would say finally, we've been in favor of increasing or continuing supports to people. And the Liberals have just announced they're going to cut all the supports that people were receiving in the pandemic, which we think was the wrong thing to do, particularly because the alternative, the EI system, doesn't actually work. It doesn't cover 60% of Canadian workers. So the system that's supposed to be the social safety net for workers doesn't actually cover the majority of workers. So we want to see changes that actually improve that social safety net so that people can get help if they need it while we're still going through this pandemic and beyond the pandemic. So that's another big concern for us. How do we get help to people who are working in gig jobs, precarious employment, self-employed people who don't have any supports right now because the existing supports that were pandemic related have been cut off and the traditional supports don't actually allow them to qualify. So that's another really big concern. So Indigenous justice, environment, and better social safety net coming out of this pandemic so that people get the help they need when they need it.
Speaking of COP26, it's just about to start this weekend. How do you think that you can push Canada's policy on climate action in the coming weeks?
We've outlined 3 areas of support or 3 areas of action that we want to see. I found that Mr. Trudeau, like Justin Trudeau, has often said the right things around the environment, but his track record is the worst of all G7 nations. The only G7 nation that has increased emissions instead of reducing them since he's taken office, so since 2015, and that puts us in the worst of all G7. That is an abysmal track record, and every target he set, he's missed. And one of his commitments was to end fossil fuel subsidies, federal government subsidizing the fossil fuel sector. And instead of ending those subsidies, he's actually increased them. So we've laid out 3 really concrete things. End the fossil fuel subsidies, something that he promised to do anyways, but something that would really signify a shift in our federal or government resources so that they're going towards renewable energy, they're going to sustainable energy, and not subsidizing the fossil fuel sector. And the second thing would be we want to see real bold commitments on reducing emissions and that those commitments are then followed through on. And the third thing that I think would be really important is we really believe that workers need to be at the heart of any plan around fighting the climate crisis. So a real plan and investment so that workers know that they'll have a good job, that there are opportunities for them in this climate crisis to actually work and have good work that'll reduce the emissions that we all know we need to reduce. So I think that there's an opportunity for good jobs and investments to create those good jobs. So those are the 3 things that we're looking for, and we'll be fighting hard.
And in terms of the just transition, how can Canadian leaders ensure that the poorest in society aren't the ones left paying the price for climate action?
Well, first, I think is to acknowledge that often is the case, that not only are the poorest or most vulnerable the most vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis, it's poor communities, people that don't have good housing, that feel the impact of things like heat waves, living in homes that aren't adequately ventilated and aren't able to respond to those extreme weather occurrences. So they're already the most impacted, and on top of that, they have to pay the price often. And so one, we have to acknowledge that they're the most impacted and that they shouldn't be, and that they shouldn't have to pay the price of it. And we need to create alternatives. So we believe in things like putting a price on pollution. Without a doubt, there is a cost of pollution. But that price on pollution should also be coupled with real alternatives so that people have an alternative to heat their homes with sustainable means and sustainable energy that's actually affordable. If it's only going to be more expensive to heat your home in the more environmentally friendly way, then people that can't afford it are going to be the ones that end up paying the price. So we want to see an alternative source of energy, alternative real options for people so that they're not just up against an increased cost in their lives, but there's a real alternative where they can choose the option that's better for the environment, and it doesn't actually also mean that they end up spending more.
You had a call last week with Justin Trudeau ahead of this week's cabinet swearing-in ceremony. Based on that call, what kind of indication did you get from the Prime Minister on areas where your policies are in line, or priorities, I guess, are in line? And where did you see any red flags of issues that you are not going to be able to work together with the Liberals?
Well, we outlined a couple of the immediate things that we'd like to see that would signify that there's a willingness to work together. And one of those things that right now we're still waiting to see is if the Liberals will stop their fight against Indigenous kids in court, stop the appeal of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal decision. So that there's a looming deadline to see if they're going to do that or not. That was one of our asks. That was one of the priorities I put forward. And to date, there hasn't been a clear indication if they're going to drop the appeal. There's been a willingness to chat, which is encouraging. But my problem is that the Liberals have often been willing to chat, and they often say the right things. They don't do the right things, and that's a real big concern. So that's one thing that we're going to wait and see. COP was something that came up because we're going to attend, and I'll be attending as well. And I want to see some commitments that Canada is going to make. And I want Justin Trudeau to acknowledge, one, that the track record has been pretty bad, and that we need to do a lot better. And I want to see those commitments. So I outlined those. And I would say the one thing that is signified in the negative is we'd said that I want to see the pandemic supports continue. So that's supports to people that have lost their jobs, people that can't go back to work, people who are self-employed. I wanted to see those continue, and I wanted to see supports continue for small businesses. These are small businesses that were amongst the hardest hit, while big box stores were able to operate and had enough space and size that they could still have people in their stores and still maintain distance. But the smaller stores were essentially shut down for a long time, and then when they were able to open, because of their smaller size, aren't able to have as many people inside. So I wanted supports to continue for them, and instead, what the Liberals did is they cut off the pandemic supports for hundreds and thousands of Canadians that have not been able to get back to work and whose sectors are still hard hit. So that to me signified an unwillingness to work together. The fact that they did the exact opposite of what we had said. Don't cut these supports, and they instead cut them. So those are, I guess, early signs. A willingness to chat about things that matter to us, but no real concrete commitment. And then the actions taken have been the opposite of what we've asked for when it comes to vulnerable people and the supports they need.
So do you suspect that the incoming term is going to be more or less cooperative than the previous term?
That is a very good question, and it remains to be seen. I don't know which way the Liberal government's headed. I've been really clear, though, my priority is to make Parliament function for people, to make it work for people, to make it deliver the help that people need. And that remains my goal. There are a lot of things that we campaigned on that initially the Liberals were opposed to, but then came around and then supported in the campaign. One of those things was paid sick leave. We had said 22 times in the past 18 months that we need to expand the coverage for workers so that they didn't have to go into work sick. Because we know if a worker has to choose between not having paid sick leave and staying at home, or going into work sick but risking infecting their colleagues, people are faced with that impossible choice, and they have to go into work because they're not going to be able to pay their bills at the end of the month if they miss that income. So we've said, and experts have said, that's probably one of the most important tools to keeping people safe. In Canada, workplace transmission was the highest source of transmission for a long period of the pandemic. People were going into work sick and then infecting their colleagues, particularly in workplaces where people couldn't work from home. So these are logistics centers, distribution centers, people that worked in transportation, people who worked in warehouses, in large facilities where they needed to be in person. That's where a lot of transmission was happening. So we had said that that's vital. 22 times we raised this, 22 times Mr. Trudeau said no, and in some cases even mocked the idea, and then went on to commit to bringing in paid sick leave during the campaign, which we thought was pretty cynical, having said no when people needed it most, and then to campaign on it in the middle of the campaign. So that's something that we want to see action on right away. So I don't see why, now that they've come around to our position, they can't just immediately work with us. We're ready to. We've indicated our support of it. And if any votes are needed in this minority government to pass that type of legislation, we're ready. Just as an example of something that we would be willing to do right away. And we've laid that out there and put out our priorities and our willingness to pass things that would help people. And really we'll see what the Liberals take with that.
In many Western nations, we've seen left-wing parties essentially go to war with themselves. That's something we've really seen in the UK for the past few years, actually. Whereas the NDP hasn't publicly seemed to grapple with those issues in the same way. So I wanted to ask you, what is the secret to unifying the party?
One, I've got to give credit to the party. We've got a great base of supporters that really believe in justice and fairness and want to build a better world. And I think there's a lot of unity in that. As a leader, I've been really active in making sure we bring people together, and that I want people to feel like they belong and that they matter and their voices matter. So I'm very open to bringing people together. I think that we have focused our energy on people. And I think that's been our strength. In the pandemic, it's been our strength in the sense of, well, other parties were a bit lost. They didn't have a clear compass in terms of what their priority was. They would chase different topics. The Conservatives were focused on China a lot and focused on things that weren't related to real people and what the struggles that they were faced with. The other parties in Parliament, the same thing. They were kind of focused on other things, and we were in one of the worst economic struggles that Canada's faced in a generation. Certainly in my lifetime, but in many people's lifetime. And so our focus was, how do we get people the help they need? And I think a testament to our party's solidarity was that's what everyone was focused on. People need help now, they need supports, and we are there for them. And that was our strength. And I feel like a part of why we were really successful in pushing the Liberals to do more for people, to get more help out to more people, was because they didn't have that same laser-like focus on what people are going through and their struggles and their needs. And we had that. And so we were very much connected with the struggles of young people that were being excluded from some of the financial support. So we were able to deliver help to them. We were very on top of the paid sick leave piece, and we got the government to move on something that was not truly paid sick leave, but close to giving people the help they needed. So we were successful there. We doubled the support that went out to people financially. We were able to continue the support when the Liberals wanted to cut it multiple times. So our success was because we care about people and we were focused on them. And a part of why the party was really showing a lot of unity and solidarity is because as a party, we were focused that way as well.
The NDP has never been in power in Canada, and it's only briefly been the official opposition. At the moment, it's the fourth party. Yet for decades, it's been pretty significantly influential in the Canadian political landscape. What is the secret to that?
I think that throughout our history, it's been that focus on people. We are unclouded by the distractions of some of the status quo parties that don't see their job as delivering the help that people need, and more so the pursuit of power for power's sake. And because we've been really focused on what people need, we're the party that pushed healthcare to the forefront nationally after forming government in one of the provinces and establishing it there. The premier, the person who headed the province, that premier went on to become the leader of the National Party and pushed healthcare at the national level. And it was, again, that focus on people should get dignity and respect. They should get healthcare, and it shouldn't matter how much money they have in their bank account or how much they earn. And that principle has guided us throughout our history as a party. The newest major national party, and smaller, but we have an influence that outstrips our size because of that focus on getting help to people and really having a pulse of what people are going through. So that's been, I think, the secret historically as well as modern day, is that really focused attention on how do we how do we get people the help they need and a real close attention to what people are going through, the struggles they're going through, and then looking for solutions to fix those problems. That's really been our focus. And we're a party that was founded by workers, so we've got a strong worker focus. We've got lots of roots in labor, but focus on what workers are going through. And that class politics is really important. We look at the world that we're living in now and see the gap between the billionaires and those at the very top and working people, and we see that makes society worse. It's bad for everyone, and our focus is how do we remedy that injustice so that workers and people have the ability to live a good life.
Many of the issues you've campaigned on, and indeed we've talked about in this interview, from racism to Indigenous rights, have been systemic problems in Canada for a very long time. Yet not enough change has happened. What do you chalk that up to? And do you think that there are too many Canadians who still refuse to believe that these are systemic problems that need to be addressed?
Yeah, I think that there is a bit of a misconception that Canadians have of how things are in Canada because of how bad things are in the States. And because of our proximity being so close to the States, we see things going on there and then think, well, things aren't as bad here. And it's true in some cases, things aren't as bad. There's an incredible division in the States. I'll give some credit to conservatives in Canada. The conservatives in Canada, by and large, don't oppose science and don't oppose healthcare. They might want to privatize it, but there is a general consensus in support of the Canadian healthcare system that we established, and that we've got to follow guidelines around science. So that's something that in the States you won't see. You'll see very ludicrous assertions by bona fide elected officials in the States that you would think are a bit preposterous that they're actually suggesting these things. So we don't have that, but there are real systemic injustice that continues. And I think a part of that is because we think things are worse in the States, we ignore the problems here. I think that there is a culture that that doesn't want to look at the problems that we have and doesn't want to accept it. And so in a lot of ways, the injustice against Indigenous people is ignored because it is so bad, it is so horrible that it doesn't fit with people's image of what Canada is to them. And I think we are worse off when we do that. We are better off when we acknowledge the problems, because then we can fix them and we can become a better place, a better country, a better society, a better community. And that's what I'm hoping we can do. What I'm really inspired by is that recently there has been this real huge shift after I mentioned when there were unmarked graves that were first identified, and the first city was in Kamloops in a residential school there. That really shocked everybody. The fact that they found 215 unmarked graves of children, of babies and little kids that were clearly killed at these residential schools, really started putting people up close in front with the reality of the injustice. And that started provoking in people this desire to do something about it. And that to me is a really positive thing, because people, instead of trying to ignore it or brush it under the carpet or under the rug and ignore it, people are saying, let's confront this. This is a part of the legacy of what it means to be in this country, and it's ongoing. We've got to do something about it. And I think that is a powerful moment in our history. I think it's a powerful pivot in a good direction, and to me it signals hopefully the change that we need to bring in, that there are people that believe in that, and that there's a bit of a momentum building around that, which to me is encouraging.
Jagmeet Singh, thank you so much.
Thank you for the questions and for the time.